Welcome to the IT Fundamentals Training Series. This is Chapter 1, Episode number 12. And today, we're going to test our memory. Welcome back to the IT Fundamentals Chapter 1, Episode 12. And like I said, today we're going to test our memory. We're actually going to take a look at the different memory modules that are used. The book does a great job of explaining it. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to just simply point out the things that you need to know from a testing perspective. And then we're going to go over the exercise piece. So first of all, understanding what, again, going back to what I've said before, understanding the acronyms that are used are so important to being able to pass the test and also understand exactly what you're dealing with. So here, one of the key things you need to understand is DIMMs and SODIMMs, and that is the dual inline memory module, which are the types of memory that go into modern desktop and tower type of PCs, so large form factor PCs. And then the SODIMM is the small outline dual inline memory module, and those go into laptops. So if you can remember, first of all, if it says SODIMM or small outline, you immediately know that that's going into a laptop, whereas the DIMM itself is going into a larger size computer. So that's one of the factors that you need to understand for the test and make sure that you understand. Now, the word dual in that acronym is a key factor in the memory as well. Dual here means that both sides of the memory chip are utilized. In fact, it says right here on page 31, the dual is in DIMM refers to the fact that the module uses pins on both sides of the circuit board. So when it talks about a circuit board, if you were to look at a piece of memory, a memory chip, it's a green circuit board, and at the bottom of it, it has these gold or bronze colored what they call pins, but they're really more like surface level pieces of metal that are on that card. And then, of course, it has the chips that are on there. And if you look at figure 1.19, this is what I'm talking about. Although that photograph is in black and white, if it were in color, what you would be looking at is a green card, gold or bronze on those pins across the bottom, and then each of the memory chips in those squares, which are black on here, are also black in on the chips themselves. And that's what you'd be looking at. And in the case of DIMMs, the memory is actually written using both sides of those the tabs or pins, if you will, on the circuit board. So now those pins and those tabs are actually absolutely important for your testing as well. And again, on page 31, it identifies common examples. So if you remember 168, 184, 240, and 288 pin configurations, that would be important for you to take a look at. Now, they use this other term here called DDR3, DDR2, and they barely mention DDR4 memory and the number of pins that are used with each one of those. Now, what you need to understand about these types of things is that each one of them, and you can see this in the figure 1.19 picture, you can see that the slot, if you will, that helps you put this into the motherboard is slightly different. So if you're looking at figure 1.19, the very top memory piece there is DDR3. The second one is DDR2. And if you look from the left going across, if you look at the fourth chip there, so in other words, there are three chips that are underneath that little tag that says DDR3-1333-4G, so on and so forth. There are three chips under there, and then that fourth tab, fourth black square there, underneath that is the insert tab for DDR3. And if you go down to the next one, more towards the center, you can barely see there is the tab for DDR2. Now, this goes back to what I talked about in some of the early recordings, the early conversations that we've had, is that the way they create the motherboards now is you can't mess it up. It's what I call stupid proofing the motherboards. That slot is where it is so that you can't stick DDR3 memory into a DDR2 motherboard and vice versa. Okay, it is that simple as to why that slot's there. That is the only reason. But it will help you identify visually immediately what type of memory you're using and what kind of memory you might need if you wanted to expand. All right, so those are some important things that you need to understand about these memory pieces. Make sure you kind of study over and understand that. Now let's take a look at the exercise 1.3, determining the types of installed RAM. So if we were to read here on page 33, look at the documentation that came with your computer to see whether there is anything about the RAM specifications in this documentation. Locate the information about installing a RAM upgrade. This will tell you where to find your RAM on your system. Okay, so if we don't want to read the instructions, although that's what it's telling you to do, and most of us probably don't have the instructions for our motherboard, what you can do is you can look on the motherboard, you find those long, slender slots where the RAM would go. And if you look at them and think about what I just taught you in figure 1.19 about the spacing as to where those slots are, those vertical slots in the pins are at, you can very easily determine and very quickly determine whether you're using DDR3 or DDR2. And that's the essence of determining the type of installed RAM in question or in item step 1. Step 2, if you don't find information in the documentation, you might need to look at the RAM itself. Of course, you can do that by taking your piece of RAM out. To take the RAM out, again, going to your motherboard on the sides. We talked about this during the motherboard process a little bit. On the sides, there's little tabs. You push both of those down, and what that does is that raises and ejects the memory. Then you pick the memory up. Typically you try and touch just the two corners of it and raise it up. Now, if you're doing it by the book, you're going to have an anti-static glove that you're wearing, and you've probably put your feet onto an anti-static mat as well. Reality is that static electricity can destroy the motherboard and it can destroy the RAM chips. I've never seen it happen though, but I'm telling you it can. And even in our data centers where I work as my primary job, we have anti-static mats when you walk into the data hall itself that we walk across, these sticky anti-static mats, and the raised flooring is also anti-static flooring, because the reality is static can destroy those motherboards and the RAM chips. So pick them up by the corners, and again, buy the book if you want to have anti-static gloves or something like that to take a to use that. Number 3, open the computer's case and locate the RAM. Identify whether it's dim or so dim. You already know whether it's dim or so dim based upon the type of computer that you have. Is it laptop? It's a so dim. If it's a desktop or a large form factor computer like a tower, it's going to be dim right off the bat. Yeah, that's going to be for the purpose of this chapter, this book, that's going to be the important piece. Number 4, examine the numbers or codes, if any, on the dim or so dim, looking for model numbers, speeds, and other pertinent information. Now, if you go back to figure 1.19, that little tag that's sitting on there that starts off by reading DDR3-1333-4G, so on and so forth, that's the information that they're talking about in examining the numbers or codes. Now, a lot of this stuff is very confusing, but I can tell you that it starts off saying it's a DDR13 or a DDR3. It's long dim, and that number there on the third line where it says 240D, that corresponds to the number of pins in there, and that's really the important piece that you need to know with that. Item 5, look at the data you gathered online to see whether you can determine anything about the memory based on those numbers. Certainly can go do that. You can even look up the manufacturer and look for identical types of memory. And then item 6, and finally, if you can't determine the RAM type or by any of these methods, find the motherboard's brand and model number, look it up on the internet, then look up the motherboard online to see whether information about RAM requirements is available. You will never get to 6. I'm telling you, all the information you need is in how I've already told you. You can physically look at the memory that exists already in the machine. You can physically look at the slots to determine DDR3 or DDR2 or SODIMM. You can actually look at the computer to determine whether it's SODIMM or DD or regular DIMM. So anyway, that is it for RAM. Our next item we'll start on page 33, and we'll be looking at hard drives at that point. And there's quite a bit of stuff to talk about on the hard drives. So look forward to coming back at you with the next one. Thanks. Bye.